You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Arsenal Pass, episode 169. I'm joined today by a somewhat sick man in the form of Hayden Dale, coming off a top 4 at Australia Nationals, with as well testing partner Dan Mackay actually winning all of New Zealand Nationals. Hayden, how are you feeling today?
Didn't get the trophy, but I did get the COVID. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it seems standard nowadays. I don't know what's up with these conventions.
Yeah, not feeling the best today. A couple of days removed, but yeah, good weekend overall. Losing top 4 of or semi-finals of national tiers in a row is a bit rough, but it's good to make another top 8, and it's pretty close. I felt pretty good all weekend. Didn't lose a game of CC until the semi-finals, so yeah, it was a good weekend.
Yeah, how'd you feel about you talked about playing Dash in the lead up to the tournament quite a bit, and obviously stuck with your pick, and I know it did well for you, but how did you feel about the pick now, sort of post-tournament?
Yeah, I felt like I couldn't lose, honestly. I felt like I couldn't lose on the deck. It felt so strong. I think it was such a great pick for the weekend. Obviously, Dan took all the way to the trophy as well. We had 2 other players play it who kind of tested with us. There's 4 of us kind of testing together. Dan gives me reps on the deck, unfortunately, so maybe we're a little bit tougher from their side, but yeah, overall, I think the deck was really strong, and felt really good about the weekend.
You said you feel like you felt like you couldn't lose. Do you think that would be the case if you took the deck to a tournament the weekend after, or do you think it was because it came as a bit of a surprise?
No, I think it's like, when you go to events sometimes and you just feel like I actually didn't think I was playing that well in draft. I kind of survived draft, to be honest. I went 2-1, 2-1 in draft, but I just felt every time I shuffled back up for CC, I felt like I kind of knew what I wanted to do, felt really comfortable with the deck, felt super comfortable with the matchups, felt like I knew what I wanted to do for that weekend. I think things change after every weekend, right? Like, decks become known, people react to meta games, etc. So maybe not, but for this weekend, definitely felt really, really strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to talk a lot about that list in the main topic of this week's podcast. But before we get there, what are your plans for the Dash deck? Are you going to do a little deck tech? Are you going to do something for Patreon? What's the current? I know you're sick right now, but what is the plan?
Yeah, I want to try and get up a deck tech. I started feeling unwell yesterday, and I'd already recorded some of it. So a big chunk of it's already recorded. So hopefully I can edit that and get it up. I think the deck building process, which we can talk about, was quite interesting. And I think there's a lot of things that you can... Dash is quite an interesting hero. There's a reason I've wanted to play this hero for multiple events, and Brendan ripped on me in the pod last week. He's like, you always say you're going to play Dash, and then you never do.
That's true, though. Nobody else holds you accountable for that. You have said that for years, though. That's true.
I talk about a lot of things that I want to play. Yeah, I was going to play it at Worlds. I tested it for Worlds. I ended up playing Dromai. I tested it for... actually, I haven't tested it for that many events. It was just PT1 and Worlds last year. Those are the main 2 events. But I do really enjoy it. And I played a lot of Hanabi Blaster when Dynasty came out. And so it was cool to sleeve up Hanabi Blaster in the deck list for this event. But yeah, deck tech coming out. I think there's a lot of theory to go in with kind of item selections, and I think the deck is a lot about value a lot of the time, but it's also about setting up specific game states and managing your deck as a resource, which is quite a cool thing to be doing in Flesh and Blood right now, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, before we get into talking more about the deck, let's head to the Command and Cookout. We have some YouTube comments from last week's podcast. If you want to get your comment read out on the podcast, shoot us a... That's a lot of comments I just said in a couple sentences. Shoot us a comment on YouTube. We'll get it queued up.
Drop us a comment of a comment.
Yeah, comment. You want to get your comment read out? Well, you gotta send us a comment first. So this the first one here comes from DMAC. They say the podcast aged so well. Congrats, guys. In terms of 3 years? So
I think they're talking about you calling me out on Dash last week. Yeah. To be honest,
I'm sure. I guess I'll take that one. But that has been a reoccurring theme: is the dash psyop into no dash play. I'm happy it worked out.
When am I psyoping?
Well, you always tell me you're gonna play it, and then you don't play it. To be fair, that's the psyop.
I think sometimes you feel comfortable with certain things or you don't and lead up. And there's been events where I felt really comfortable in the lead up to what I'm going to play. And there's other events where I'm like, I don't feel comfortable with this deck. And then Audible or someone has a better option that they've tested a lot, and I'm going to trust someone else in a testing group or whatever, and I'll make the change. I don't like doing that, to be fair. I think it's never really proved successful to me, to be honest, except for PT1. I think if I look at the events where I've tested, locked in a deck early, like my first nationals, when nationals top 4 last year, Singapore calling top 8, Worlds 2022. I think all those events I was like locked in early. So I'm trying to get on the strategy. I'm just not very good at it.
All right, next one is from Adam. They say at Brandon. The Fab community in San Diego is awesome. I recently moved away from there to China for work, but I miss the city every day. I was there last week, and I feel like I already missed it too. It's also very warm where I live. It's 100 degrees. That's the minimum right now, so it's crazy.
7 Celsius.
I think it's like 43 or 46. It's up there in the 40s.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, it's warm. It's interesting. So for Texas summers, like you definitely get used to it.
38.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so it gets up to like 110, 115. I think that's when you get to like the 43 range or 44. Yeah, so every time summer comes back around, you're like, okay, I've lived here for a while. I was born here. I was born in the heat. I'll be fine. And then it starts creeping up, and you're like, oh my God. What's crazy is that 100 degrees is like, that's cool. In a month or two, that's going to be cool. The standard will be 110 plus. And man, I go outside and I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing here? This place has been cursed. Honestly, I kind of like it. I run in that heat. But it's hard to like do things casually in the Texas heat. Like it's hard to like go enjoy the day. It's like you can go out and run and suffer, but that's about it. That's about it. Next one is from.
It's nice having hot summers here, but we have the sea breeze, so we can.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 40, like 110 days or whatever.
Oh, really?
It feels hot.
I didn't know that Sydney got up to that heat.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Come down with them.
I thought that Sydney was close to like Los Angeles in terms of weather. Someone had told me that one time.
I think it's pretty similar. Yeah, I think it's pretty similar.
Okay, so Los Angeles probably never gets above like 85. Probably never.
No way. I've been to LA when it's been.
Really?
If you're in the hills.
In the hills. Oh yeah. San Bernardino. You go inland like 30 minutes. 100%. It gets over 100 degrees. But anywhere near the ocean, I don't think it gets above 90 very often at all.
Oh, Sydney. So Sydney, for reference, is quite big, Brendan. I know it's not as big as Dallas, in terms of.
Well, it couldn't be, because then it would be the biggest city in the world. But yep.
Well, I actually think it's bigger. It stretches kind of like out west, about an hour and 20 drive. Is still considered Sydney. So out west, it gets really hot, and that's where a lot of population live. Not everyone can live on the beaches, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, then it's identical to Los Angeles. Because if you go 30 minutes inland, it gets. I mean, that's just California in general. It gets super hot.
Yeah.
Next one is from John. They say, can't have a Turncycle Math Wizard deck. Can I introduce you to Michael Hamilton's Icelander deck? Yep. I remember reading that. I was like, okay, touche, John. Touche.
But you mean that's not really Wizard, I don't know. Icelander never really felt like Wizard to me.
Honestly, John is just right. Icelander's a Wizard, and it was definitely a Mathy deck. Next one is from Caleb. They say, Brian said the adult Florian is different.
Oh yeah, we talked about Florian on the pod last week, and the kind of the 4 card threshold, and apparently on the US Nat stream, he didn't say it would be different. I think he said that ability will change, I think is what he said. So whatever that means in terms of what that means for adult Florian versus young Florian.
Yeah, assuming it's scaling numbers, right?
It would make sense, right? That's what we were talking about last week. If it wasn't, it would be quite interesting if they didn't scale the numbers on Florian. I think just for reference, if you weren't listening last week or you haven't seen Florian yet, there's an Elemental Runeblade hero. We've seen the young version so far, 4 intellect, 20 health. It says if there are 4 or more Earth cards in your banner zone, Florian gets, if you would create 1 or more Aura tokens, instead create that many +1 of each of those tokens. So we're talking about the scaling of having X amount of Earth cards, potentially for CC being more. And then actually, someone did call out that we didn't talk about the interaction between the specialization and Germinate and the hero ability. Germinate is the Florian specialization. Earth Runeblade action has XX cost at blue. Defense for 3. Earth Runeblade action says create a rune chant or embodiment of Earth token. Repeat this process X more times. Gain X +1 life. So interacts obviously really favorably with Florian's hero ability. So that is a good call out, but we didn't look at that.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we had a lot of people shouting out Evan. which is cool. It was great. It was great to have Evan on the pod. Yeah, and good luck to him in his future endeavors, particularly in Amsterdam. Hayden, you're confirmed not going, right? At this
I'm
point.
not going. No, yeah. I can't make it work, unfortunately. But I will be at Worlds. Super excited, and I'm like eyeing up the calling Manila, but I don't think it's going to line up time wise. So I think probably for the rest of the year, calling Sydney is coming up, World Championships, and then I would like to get to one more event this year. I just don't know. Manila seems like the most likely, but the other one that honestly I would love to go to, because it's around my birthday if it lined up, is the calling Portland. One of my favorite. Wait, it's Portland, right? Yeah, calling Portland is coming later in the year. I people don't hate me, but I always mix up the Pacific Northwest cities.
Like Portland, Seattle,
and Seattle. Yeah, just because I've been to both, but I like both of them. So, but I'm pretty sure it's calling Portland. So I would love to get out there, go back to have a little holiday. But it's quite close to Worlds, so I think it's November 22nd. Calling Portland. It's like 2 days. It's actually my birthday weekend, so I'm like, could I go to Portland? But it's also kind of hard to fly there from Sydney, so I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, and that's like after the summer, right? So it should be starting to cool down a bit in Portland.
It's like, I don't know, 22nd, 24th of November. How warm was it there in the Pacific Northwest? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it starts to get
summer
cold
for us then.
Yeah, I think it starts to get pretty cold. Maybe even starts snowing. I'm just wondering because the Pacific Northwest is a bit famous for, being a bit gray and rainy during some points of the year. So
dude, I went there at peak summer like 5 years ago, and it was not warm.
Oh, really?
And raining, yeah.
Oh, it was raining the whole time? Yeah. There's definitely times to go where it's just absolutely beautiful, but there's also times when it's absolutely
It wasn't raining the whole time, but a lot of the time. And it was beautiful. It reminds me a lot of New Zealand.
Reminds me of when I went to Scotland in the summer and it was beautiful, sunny, and I was like, this is the greatest place ever. And they're like, come back any of the other 8 months.
Anytime that isn't this month, that's the 1 month of good weather you get in Scotland. Yeah, I would like to go to Edinburgh, actually.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
I was trying to line it up for I'm on a work trip in September to the UK, and I was like, oh, could I get a train up to Edinburgh for the weekend? But I don't know if I can make it work, unfortunately. I'd love to go.
All right, next one is from Slippery to say, congrats on the top 8. Hayden, that top 8 game was a nail biter for sure. Funny to see after Brendan was dogging you for always coping on Dash from the last pod.
To be fair, Brendan is right. He's got a point.
I've heard a lot of Dash stuff. Also, I wasn't a part of the testing process. I didn't even know where the deck was at that point. So outside looking in, I was like, damn, is this that copium again? I was like, or is it for real? Seems like everybody played it though.
Dude, Tarek. Well, I mean, there was literally, to be fair, this time testing for nationals, I went back to something that I did for nationals number 1, which is like, I just tested with Damakai, and then we had Tom -IO Dowling join us from Sydney perspective, and then Dave, our friend and New Zealand Top 8 Nationals competitor, join us from Dan's end. And it was just kind of the 4 of us, really, which was kind of cool to have like a small testing group and work on things. So yeah, it was pretty sweet.
Damn it, kind of got to get up to any pro tour soon.
He's coming to Worlds. Yeah, he's coming up to Worlds, so it's gonna be exciting. I think we're basically all booked. So
awesome. Well, if you want to get your question read out in next week's podcast, shoot us a comment on YouTube. We'll get it queued up for that command and cookout. Hey, anything else you wanna touch upon before we hop into the main topic?
I feel like there was something and I forgot. I've definitely got really bad brain fog today.
What do you think is what's the SOP moving forward to not get sick at conventions? Because I got sick at the last couple I went to, and I'm kind of over it. Like, how do we not? You were even at a small one. Like the one I went to had like 3,000 people at least, because it was coincided with MamoCon, which is like the biggest Comic-Con or like biggest fucking dress. I don't know. It's a general con for anime and nerd stuff, and there's probably 10,000 people total. It was insane.
I mean, it was just national, so it was just the 120 competitors, and then the judges and staff and people playing the events. I mean,
you shake a lot of hands.
Nah, not really. I mean, just my boys. I let them on the fist bump territory. I think it's tough, right? Like, I don't know. I unfortunately heard that maybe some people had showed up with COVID knowingly, which is obviously a bit rough, but it's not against the law, I guess. I guess I could wear a mask, but how much does that actually help? And I have a pretty good immune system. Like, I don't really get sick too often. It's kind of a little bit of role reversal here, right, Brendan?
Yeah.
Now, I say that now. Actually, I'm saying I never really get sick. Now I'll go on the Brendan train of getting sick like 4 times in 6 months or whatever.
I don't get sick. By the way, I did.
Careful what you say.
I did get put on allergy medication. It did make a big difference, to be honest.
Oh,
So
good, nice.
guess I'm a seasonal allergy kind of guy now.
SOP is probably get some more sleep the night after the event. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm probably not gonna do the mask because I did that plenty of times with Flesh and Blood events, and dude, it just kind of sucks, man. Like
it really takes my focus away. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like, man, your face just gets like so oily and so nasty, and you're just like, it just takes you out of it for sure. I think I'm gonna have to go fist bump territory with like a backup hand sanitizer.
Yeah, Tom Dowling always carries a hand sanitizer, so just shout out to Tommy D.
What did he play Dash.io or?
No, he played Dash. He played the deck with the 4 of us. Him and Dave didn't manage to get as many reps on the deck. Unfortunately, I think that made a big difference because I think this deck is, although it's like if you've played Dash before, I think it's pretty easy to operate with some of the philosophies. But I just think in this meta, there's a lot of really small edges that you need to gain to make sure you can win matchups. And I think if you aren't able to get the gains, then unfortunately, it can be a little bit tough. But I think Tom crushed draft. I think he went like XO or 5-1 in draft. So yeah,
nice. All right, well, let's talk about that Dash deck. I have it pulled up now. So how did Dash edge out over any of the other heroes or the other choices you had talked about on the podcast, and also things you were throwing around and testing?
I think for me, like I was really keen to play Prism actually. I think Prism's kind of the deck that I like playing decks that have a lot of quote unquote agency, right? Like in terms of you get to make decisions, you get to make plays, you get to find lines, you get to maybe potentially work your way out of games that might seem unwinnable. I like basically if every game feels winnable to some extent, that feels really good to me. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. And I think Prism in some like early testing definitely felt like that. Like, there's a lot of play. I just ultimately couldn't get Prism to have a strong enough matchup against Zen. It felt like a 20 or 30%er. So I just kind of had to put Prism down. We definitely looked at KO for a little bit as well. I think coming off the back of the last format, right? Like KO was the best deck coming out of the last format, especially with the printing of Sash. So it felt kind of crazy to not revisit that. And actually, we kind of came up with a pretty cool KO list, I think, that looked to potentially like abuse Sash a little bit more, play some extra cards that maybe people weren't looking at, which definitely going to try and share a deck tech on that as well, the KO deck that we put together for potentially for Nationals. But again, ultimately, just kind of similar kind of thing. The matchup didn't feel good enough into Zen, didn't feel like you had enough kind of, I guess agency. It's such a trap word, agency, sometimes, because, you know, you got to draw the right cards at the right time.
Well,
but it just felt consistently like you couldn't win enough games with it.
So there was a player, a Flesh and Blood player, also Magic the Gathering player, that got second in a Pro Tour recently and was playing a deck called Boris Heroic. And I remember on Twitter, he replied to somebody, you know, critiquing his deck, called him an agency simp. That player went on to win the most recent Magic the Gathering Pro Tour. His name is Simon Nielsen. I don't know if you knew about that.
Oh, dude, Simon's a killer. Yeah. I was looking in because he joined us for the last PTLA, right, testing, and I saw in the testing group everyone congratulating him for his PT win. That's insane. The guy's been on an insane tier.
5 out of
multiple
6.
like top 8s.
Yeah, 5 out of 6. It's crazy.
World Championship, Player of the Year. Like,
yeah,
insane.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I remember he was calling people, like, he said something about agency simp. So yeah, I remember that was something that I really cared. I still do care about it, to be fair. I like to pretend like I don't, but I actively do avoid decks that feel like they have very little agency, particularly like the more aggressive decks where, you know, sometimes you have to wait a long time to lose a game that you've already lost to play for some like very low percent outers and you have no cards in hand. Like, it's not a Flesh and Blood thing as much, but it's just painful, man. I really hate it. So, but it's just hard for me to objectively evaluate those decks.
I think is that something that stems from playing Briar at PT Lille?
I mean, that's part of it. So like when I played Briar PT Lille, the one thing I said is I felt like I was spectating my own games because the lines that I had to do were very clear. It was very easy. It was very simple. Yeah. And then same with my opponents. So, you know, in a true mirror match, the funny thing about mirror matches is that, you know, the initial idea is like, oh, we're playing a mirror, the most skilled player wins. But once you realize, like, once you go deeper down that rabbit hole, it actually just becomes completely draw dependent. And then, of course, you extrapolate that infinitely all all games are just completely draw dependent. But yeah, playing Briar, I did feel like I was spectating my own games, making no relevant decisions, and I was completely at the mercy of the top of my deck. And I think that a lot of that comes from there wasn't an opportunity to make a lot of mistakes. And it's kind of weird for me to say that I prefer a deck that I have an opportunity to make mistakes, because I think that's a more correct statement than saying the opportunity to make good plays. Because I actually don't think that exists, and we've talked about the dogma behind that. But yeah, I believe decks that give you potential opportunities to make mistakes are the ones I like, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you stand back and you look at it, there's always a correct, like, optimal line, right? But yeah, I completely agree. Like, are you playing a deck where it's easier to navigate that? Are you playing a matchup where it's easier to navigate that? And I think a format that fills itself with decks that have decision points to effectively make mistakes or to make suboptimal plays. I think an interesting format, honestly. I think KO has a bit more of that than something like Briar, for instance. But also, it's kind of hard to say, right? Because it's kind of a bit of a bell curve adoption of this thought process. And when you play a deck so much, you can kind of step back and be like, well, I just know I'm playing, optimally on this or whatever. We've tested all these different ways to play. So now it feels like I'm just not playing the deck, quote unquote. But yeah, I mean, that's why I like decks where it feels like you always have, the longer a game goes in theory, the more decisions you have. That's not always true, depending on like the archetype. We don't talk about fatigue, but I think it's cool to have those opportunities. And sometimes playing a game where you don't have to make many decisions, I can get around, especially if you're absolutely wrecking your opponent.
I'll do that at like Pro Tour or like very high level events. I just can't. The problem is like, I could never see myself doing that at like lower level events or, like a locals or something like that. So I don't have a lot of practice playing those decks inherently.
Coming from the Kano main.
Kano.
We tested a decent bit of Kano. Kindle is a card, man.
Yeah.
That deck is.
Makai is a wizard. He is a wizard.
Dude, the Kindle reminds me so much of Tome. I've even blanked the name from my mind. From my Tome. What's it called? No.
Sorry,
the Dromite Tome.
Oh,
the Dromite Tome.
The one you like, Tome of Imperial Flame.
Imperial Flame. Yeah. Brain fog is bad today, man. I think Kindle reminds you so much of that card. Like, it raises the ceiling of the deck, but at a massive cost to variance. And I actually think it makes Kano a lot less enjoyable than it used to be, which is kind of what I thought happened to Tome. It's so interesting. Do you remember 18 months ago, whatever it was, when Brian sat down in the pod and he's like, yep, we're going to increase the ceiling on decks, like the power level, but we're also going to increase the variance.
And then he did what he said.
And did exactly what they said they're going to do. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
It's an interesting, we talked about the long-term effects and risks of doing something like that as well. Seems like it's working out. I think ultimately, all those sort of minute discussions aside, like Part the Misfail, big success. And I think it's been a turning point in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I mean, look at some I think the critique could be it's had too much of an impact on the format. I think Enigma, Zen, and even we're seeing Nu kind of come up a little bit as well. Nu was the second most played deck at our nationals, actually, interestingly. But yeah, I think it is obviously having a massive impact on the format in terms of playability. Whereas you look at something like Heavy Hitters, right? Like KO had a big impact on the format, but Betsy did not, Olympia did not. A lot of these heroes had zero impact on the format. You look at Bright Lights. We can not talk about that. But anyway, Uprising I think is interesting. Like Dromai didn't have immediate impact on the format, right? That was a bit of a slow burner. It was like Phi, and then Icelander came in, and so I think Partners on the other hand is quite a big impact. And honestly, I think the good thing is that it's a really fun set. So I think it's okay. Something like Uprising, some of the critique of that having such a big impact was that those decks weren't always particularly fun to play with or play against. Whether it's like Phi, Stubby's Phi, or it's like being locked out by Icelander just spamming Frostbite tokens at you, or Dragons of Dromai just being such a grind to play against. Partners has quite a different kind of way that the set kind of plays, I think, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about that testing process. I don't know how much you want to dive into it. You want to talk about it from like a month out, 2 weeks out, kind of what you waffled between in terms of decks. I know you mentioned Prism, how you tested for draft. Would you use that same system moving forward? Like, did you play online? Did you play in person, etc.?
Most of my class constructed is definitely playing online. So it's like 1 to 2 games, sometimes 3 a night into the Doctor. Sometimes we get some extra games in with others if they're about. My time has been pretty limited this year for playing Flesh and Blood, so it's like try and just get a consistent hour or 90 minutes an evening if I can into some testing, which has been great. Actually, honestly, it's been great. And it kind of started with looking for a deck that just had raw power, right? So went through KO, kind of came to this KO list that we really liked, but as Zen kind of got more tuned and refined as we saw these lists come out, and then especially after US Nationals, it was like, no chance of playing this deck, I think. Prism was definitely there. It was kind of my preferred option. And then just, didn't want to keep dumping time into a deck that I just felt I couldn't get there. So Dash was the option I've been kind of looking at probably for about a month out. I messaged the group and was like, I think Dash could be good because of basically the damage opportunity. So Zen has the best 1-turn damage in the game right now, right? But Dash actually has the best kind of 4 to 6 damage, total damage turns in the game right now. So I think it was a really good option if you could find a way to make sure that you could extract all that damage. You could get all your counters off Tickler Pounder. You could have good turn 0 or turn 1s. And that's kind of where, the T-Bones and the Meganetics came from afterwards to make that kind of come through. And then from there, it just became kind of like, I'm keen to play this. I went and played like an in-person, like winner box event just to get some reps. I like to get some physical reps I can on the cards. Played Dash, felt really good about it. And then kind of from that 2 weeks before, logged in on Dash and just kept tweaking and tuning the deck. Came up with a few kind of cool things for matchups where we couldn't win. Like Enigma felt honestly pretty close to unwinnable. And then Dan had the idea of like, I was like, maybe we should try Teleshine. Dan's like, I think we should try Hanabi Blaster. And so we went back to the well with Hanabi Blaster, turned that matchup around completely into what I think is actually a favorable matchup. I got to play in the last round of Swiss, already locked to top 8, but I played into Enigma, who was like 1st or 2nd seed. And I just killed him on like turn 6, presenting well over like 140 damage or something. Like it was just insane. Just Hanabi Blaster, Max V, high octane turns, etc. Well, not high octane turns, sorry. Max V and Hanabi do so much work. So,
yeah,
it was cool. Cool to come to.
Well, let's look at the deck list. Anything you want to point out? What's up?
No, you asked about draft, but let's talk CC first. Let's
talk about the deck list and we'll hop into draft. What do you want to point out specifically here? And like, I know you talked about, like, can you just give us like a very high level archetypically sort of where this lies on the Dash matrix of more controlling, more aggressive, mid-range, etc.?
Yeah, if you want to see the list, the deck list is, we'll drop in the comments, right? So you can see the deck list, but yep, that's what I meant, description. It's a very aggressive Dash deck. We're not playing Plasma Purifiers. We're playing the single Induction Chamber, which a lot of the time doesn't make your deck. You're starting with Tickler Pounder in most of these matchups. And Chamber is there as... people think it's like an anti-fatigue tech to play, kind of the Chamber. But really what it's more about is will you get more value off Chamber or you get more value off Tickler Pounder? And that's kind of the decision to which one you play. If your opponent is planning to block a lot, you can always find, like if they're planning to try and fatigue you, often Pounder is actually the correct item to start because you can set up these really big turns. Whereas Chamber is just consistent value where you can actually get ground out. But in matchups where, it's going to be a bit more of a grind, games are going to go 8-10 turns, then a lot of the time Chamber is correct. But fatigue matchups don't actually go that long. You're trying to kill them in 5 to 6 turns or you probably die. So Chamber is there for that kind of piece of it. In terms of like other kind of, things that people maybe haven't been playing as much of, we played the Rainbow T-Bones, which I talk a lot about in kind of the deck tick I've recorded so far, and maybe not playing those in the future. I think Yellow T-Bone has value when people aren't kind of expecting it, but less value when people are looking to kind of play around it. And then Yellow Throttle, I think, is like quite a good introduction to the deck list. A lot of the time, you're actually playing more than 60 cards. You're using your deck as a resource. And you don't want extra blues, and you don't necessarily want extra reds where you can draw just these clunky red hands. You kind of want something that can be a tall attack for the Prism and Enigma matchups, but also at the same, so it gets less impacted by debuffs like Dense Bloom Mist, Footsteps, etc. But you also want something that can kind of be resources if needed to balance out the deck and the ratios. So Yellow Throttle was kind of an MVP in that standpoint. And then Underloop Red for the 4 breakpoint into the similar sort of matchups. And when you kind of play some extra cards as an extra good boosting red for max V and high octane turns, that can also keep damage density in your deck, I think is quite a good card. So I think the deck list in the end kind of felt pretty refined. There's maybe some changes I make if I pick this deck up again, but honestly towards the end, and we play a massive 10 equipments, right? Because you have a lot of space actually, because you're not playing Purifiers, you're not trying to switch into a hybrid Dash build where you're playing defense reactions, etc. They're just not good right now. They're maybe okay into Warrior, but they're pretty bad into Guardian, which is Victor, if it's even being played. They're not good into the Assassins. They're not good into the aggro decks. So you basically just want to be the best damage deck possible. And then you have really, really strong equipment. Obviously, all the usual suspects from previous, like Tickler Foundry Heart and Achilles Accelerator. But you also have Stonewall Gauntlet, which in the Zen matchup can be worth up to 5-6 damage, which is kind of insane. Otherwise, it just provides in a lot of matchups like a free Iron Hide, effectively, like a double Iron Rot. And then Balance of Justice for those matchups where they draw cards versus Crown for the other matchups. And then I was afraid of Kano because I think Kano's really high ceiling right now, so I played the Spellfree Gloves as well.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to talk about specifically in the sideboard here, or what you have sort of outside of your core deck?
Oh, like the maybe board, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some cards that you can see in there that were kind of considerations through the testing process. So we started on Adaptive Plating, and Tom Dowling made a pretty good point of like quickly of, isn't Stonewall just better because of the Zen matchup? We put onto that immediately. We tried like extra poppers for the Prison matchup, but honestly, I just don't think they're good. So the main issue with like the Prison matchup is Herald of Triumph is really strong right now, and they're on like a Herald of Triumph 9-off plan with the -1. So like what you want is a 7-power popper, and the best one is Demolition Protocol, and it's pretty bad if you ever draw it into it not being a popper. And if you ever draw on a Max V hand or High Octane or Damage hand or whatever, it's pretty bad. So I don't think it's worth playing those. We tried extra backup protocols red, but if you draw them early or draw multiple, they're really bad. CNC was like an option for kind of maybe the Azalea matchup, but I don't want to play generics in the deck. And then you can see, just some of the other stuff. Like Signal Jam is a card that I know showed up at the UK Nationals. So you can see in the maybe board here. We tested it and tried it. Tried it in 2 games, to be fair. It was fine. But I just want consistency out of my decks all the time. And a blue that doesn't boost or isn't named Magnetic Shockwave or isn't one of my insane broken items. I just don't want it in there. So yeah, I don't know. There's kind of a few things in there. BIOS update. I know calling champion, former national champion Sam Sutherland was really big on BIOS update for the new matchup. He had that in his list. He played Dash as well at Nationals, but not something that I was particularly enjoying. I just want to cast max velocity as much as possible. And so basically the whole deck was kind of built to be able to do that or have really strong high octane turns.
Did Sam's list look similar to yours, or is it quite different?
I think it's quite different. I haven't seen it, but he told me some of the cards he was playing. I think it's, as much as a Dash deck can be, a reasonable amount different. I don't think, I think he was, I don't know if he was on Purifies actually. I forgot to ask him. I'm not sure he was, but he was definitely on things like BIOS update. I don't think he was playing like Underloops or Yellow Throttles or anything. And I don't think he's playing Magnetic Shockwaves or the Yellow T-Bones either. So I think quite a bit different. Probably at least like 12, 15 cards different.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want to give us a rundown of your sort of tournament run quickly? I mean, you don't have to go too deep into each matchup, but just a quick rundown.
Thank you, quick run. So for the Australian, for the tier, I guess they're like tier 2 nationals, not US nationals, basically. The format is like 3 rounds CC, 3 rounds draft, 3 rounds draft on day 1. So it's 9 rounds, which, you guys in the US don't have to play 9 rounds. You guys gave it a little bit better than us. It's a bit rough. You used to sort of start at 9 a.m. and you finish at like 7:30, 8 p.m. It's a bit, it's a lot of flesh and blood, honestly. It's quite taxing and tiring. But 3 rounds CC, I played Zen round 1, then I played a Reiner on stream round 2 and a Zen round 3. Zen is a good matchup. That's like the reason you want to play Dash, I think. And although I ultimately lose to it in top 4, it was my first loss to Zen of the 5 games of the weekend. It is a good matchup for you and is a reason to play the deck. So feel pretty good Commander CC 3-0 into draft. Draft I was quite worried about, honestly. I tried to test as much as I could, did in-person testing, did a little bit of like online play, but honestly it just doesn't gel with me, the online drafts at all. So tried to get in-person drafts, didn't get as many as I wanted to, didn't feel good about my strategy. Honestly, my strategy, Brendan, was just like, don't draft new unless I immediately get like forced into it. But I was happy to draft Zen or Enigma. So draft 1, draft Zen kind of comes to me. I end up as like a 1 or 3 Zen, but my deck feels pretty reasonable. Win a Zen Mirror. I played really badly in that game. I was struggling with my draft games, not playing particularly well as well, but got lucky and won that game still. Lost to Enigma in round 2, and then a win against Enigma in round 3. Draft 2, I end up drafting Enigma. Kind of get put into this weird situation where I open a pack and pack 1 that is absolutely like dog water. Like it's so bad, so shit. The best card was like a red hiss, and then like a Skybody Kikoi, which I like a lot. So I just kind of ship the new card, take the Skybody Kikoi, and then just be like, okay, hopefully the person to my right sends me a signal. And then I don't really get a signal in pick 2, and then pick 4, I think there's like a red Double Trouble in the pack, which is probably the best new card, honestly, in limited. And it just feels like I've kind of, because it was like decent new cards in the last 2 packs as well. I feel like I've put definitely the person to my left, immediate left, potentially the person to their left as well into new, and just don't feel like I can take the cards. So Enigma looks pretty open. There's like multiple Zen cards missing. I just go into Enigma and kind of draft it. End up as 1 of 3 again. Win round 1 against Zen, lose round 2 against Nu, win round 3 against Zen, end up 7-2 on the day after day 1 of Nationals, and then it's 3 rounds of CC to close out on day 2, and then top 8 cut. So Zen played round 1 of day 2. Zen against the new national champion, Zach Gardner. So we actually played in the first round on day 2, and then he got his revenge in top 4 against me. I won that one in the Swiss. Prism on stream, actually in a really tight game. Really cool game, actually. It's worth, if you go and check out the Fluke and Box stream, I think that game's pretty good. I won that one. And then Enigma, my last round, as I talked about, where I just steamrolled Hanabi Blaster, a lot of damage over a few turns. And then top 8 Prism won in a bit more of a nicer match than my stream Swiss one. And then ultimately losing on the feature match in top 4, which it kind of was close-ish, but I never got going. I had a pretty bad start to the game, and Zach's turns were pretty solid. So was kind of never really in the spot I needed to be to win that game, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the learnings from the tournament overall, and are there any changes? I know we talked about slightly when talking about the deck list, but any changes that you would make?
I just changed the process around draft a little bit more. I need to play more games of draft, I think. Understand from like a fundamental standpoint the draft, which I feel like I kind of got a bit better in the last few days of the cards I wanted in my deck. I still didn't feel particularly confident about that. I wish I had spent some time trying to learn how to draft new. I just felt like I wasn't even confident with the other 2 heroes, and I felt like I was better off spending my time on those 2 heroes rather than trying to work out new as well. So I would probably change how I approach getting more games in, so I can learn the cards I want in my deck a bit better, and also just some of the game patterns a bit better, which kind of probably looks like coming out with kind of stock standard draft lists and just playing them a lot.
Yeah, I remember doing that before the World Championships, like the first one. I don't know if that was the only time you did that, or if you did it.
Yeah, we did it before Leal, I think, right? With Uprising, we did that with like stock standard decks before Leal, which I found really helpful. And then, yeah, I think probably honestly CC, I wouldn't really change anything. I felt like I took a step back, looked at what the format was going to be, landed on a decision of a deck that I felt was going to be good into the meta. We tuned it, we worked on matchup. Like all our game plans felt really good for the most part, except for some maybe like fringe decks. And the list felt really, really tight. I mean, like, yeah, my first loss in CC was the top 4 game. I went 7-1 in CC. I think Dan went 7-2 or something or 8-2, whatever in CC. And yeah, it just felt the CC felt pretty good. I felt like draft was letting me down a little bit, so I felt a little bit lucky to get out with honestly the 2-1-2-1 to still be able to make top 8.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, so outside of the process, anything that went particularly wrong? Did you have any like bad misplays, or did you feel like you were playing very well on the day? Oh,
I felt like I was playing really well in CC. Honestly, I felt like I didn't really. I made one small mistake, which potentially isn't even a mistake. I just played a line that was a lot riskier in my Prism match on stream, which is why I think it's an interesting game. Because I like to play that matchup kind of aggressively with like blocking at the start of the game to deny them heralds and deny them figments, and just give them the window. If they have kind of the nut hand, they have it, but they have to find it before turn 4, otherwise they're kind of just dead. And my opponent like finds the Herald of Erudition on the last possible turn. I think that she can, and then yeah, that kind of is an interesting game. But I don't think it's just a misplay. Whereas in draft, yeah, I definitely made some misplays. I made a pretty bad misplay on like turn 1 of my Zen Mirror in my first draft, where like I got hit with a blue Blanche, and then I tried to pitch to a Tiger taming to make a Tiger, and obviously didn't make a Tiger. It was pretty bad. I had a pretty terrible hand anyway, but made it worse by playing badly. It almost cost me the game, I think. I felt like I played really well after that point to get back into the game, but that was almost tilting. And then I made a mistake on the very last round of day 1 on the 9th round, which I'll forgive myself a little bit because I think everyone was really tired by that point, like 7:30 p.m. in the evening after starting at 9 a.m. But I basically missed 4 damage by blocking with the wrong card in my Enigma vs. Sin game. So yeah, a couple of memorable mistakes, honestly. Luckily, they didn't punish me. I won both those games and then got out of draft. And then, yes, like I say, CC, I felt like things did pretty well. So.
Anything else you want to close out with in regards to nationals, like maybe a closing sentiment on, sort of the back-to-backs here, like kind of, maybe a little bit. I think it's a really good performance, by the way. But back-to-back bridesmaids, like you sort of feeling the type of way about that? Or are you overall pretty happy with your result?
I think the last 12 months in particular have been tough on the result front in Flesh and Blood. I had a pretty bad run to end the year into Worlds, and then a pretty rough start the year, I think, as well. Did really badly in LA. Kind of punted away a calling top 8 probably in New Zealand in February as well, which felt pretty bad at the heavy hitters calling. And then, so to at least like be able to top 4 this event and feel like I was playing at least a little bit better and preparing maybe in a better way was nice. But yeah, I definitely feel like I need to work a little bit harder if I'm going to get some results. And it's really tough, right? Like people are getting so much better at this game. Like you get so much more punished for your mistakes. Whereas, maybe 18 months ago, the same mistakes would have, still resulted in wins or top 8s or whatever. But, these small mistakes, they add up really quickly now. And some of these formats as well can be super punishing for that as well. I think heavy hitters as a limited format, for instance, was. I think the CC format can be punishing. So no, I don't know. I want to keep playing competitive Flesh and Blood as much as I can, and just probably focusing in on key events and making sure that my testing process is as streamlined as possible, given the time that I feel like I don't have. But I feel like this went pretty well. I would like to. Honestly, I wanted that trophy. Like I really wanted to be a 2-time national champion, and I felt really good. I was saying to my friends on the morning of after I played round 1, I was like, I don't think I can lose in CC. I feel so good right now. I don't think I can lose, and obviously I do lose it, but you can't win them all. But I felt really good.
Yeah, I think that the low-ish and sort of, you can argue, high skill of Flesh and Blood is a double-edged sword. I mean, you start to feel it as the game ages. The better player often wins, but that can that can be tough when there's a lot of really, really good players. What do you think is like your 5-year competitive Flesh and Blood plan? Do you think you're going to be like sort of easing out and maybe focusing on more career things, or do you think you're going to get engaged with the game from a competitive sort of viewpoint for the next? Yeah, I mean, for that kind of timeline, do you think you can hone in more on pro tours and world championships? Like, what sort of is the plan that you're tossing around? Because I've seen you go through evolutions, right? You're like, this is probably the last year, I'm getting a lot more busy, etc. And then you kind of, potentially get reignited. What is currently the next, like the 5-year plan for competitive Flesh and Blood?
I don't know. You know what it's like. You get that bug, right? Especially when you come back from, and I'm not talking about the one I have right now. When you come back from an event, right?
You get COVID, and then you're like, I need more.
You get the competitive bug. And I think you come back and you want, right? You want to play more competitive events. That adrenaline that you get when you're playing these big events. I think that's definitely dampened for me to a degree. But I think that's natural. You play so many pro tours or tier 3, tier 4 events. I think it's natural that it dampens a little bit. It hasn't, but it's still like quite strong for me, I think. And I want to make sure that I'm able to play competitive events. I think I feel in a pretty privileged position where from the kind of first, well, at least maybe not this past 12 months, but the 18 months before that, I had a lot of good competitive performances with, some wins, top 8s, top 16s and things. And so I have a lot of PTIs banked. So I can kind of pick and choose the events I go to over the next 5 years, potentially. Obviously, and as well, picking up the kind of world's invite from this, I can save the PTI for a future event as well. So I feel like I can kind of pick and choose the events I want to go to. I'm definitely going to continue to play competitive Flesh and Blood. Like, I don't think I just don't think I can play. I don't think I could ever play casual Flesh and Blood only. I think if I'm playing Flesh and Blood, it's going to have a competitive nature to it. It's just how I'm wired. It's just who I am. I think it's what I want to do when I'm playing card games. So I think it's going to be picking and choosing pro tours over the next 5 years, like not going to Amsterdam. I think it'll be the same for me next year. It'll be picking probably, I'm going to try and get to Worlds every year, definitely, if that lines up. And then it's probably, a pro tour and then maybe a calling or two to travel to. And some years that might look like only local. Some years it might be like, I'm going to try and tag on a holiday and go to somewhere. But you know what? I said this last year, right, Brendan? I was like, I don't know if I'm able to make it to certain events. I'm probably not going to travel for any callings. I went to the world premiere in Japan this year to play in the calling. Thinking about going to Manila later this year, maybe in Portland. So as much as I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to travel, it's like, no, I mean, it gets you. And then you're like, I just look up flights and just see what the options are,
Yeah,
so.
I think rattling off the good performances definitely helps as well, because you kind of get that validation that you can still play, you get that dopamine and things like that.
It's kind of interesting though, because I think on the opposite side, when I don't know how you feel. I'm interested to hear. Answer the question yourself after this. But when I don't get those performances, I think it gives me equal as amount. It's like, hey, I can't be bad at this game. Like I feel like I had these results previously. I must still be able to do this.
That's
like,
very interesting.
I'm going to go back and prove it wrong for myself. I don't know. How do you feel?
I think it's really interesting when part of your persona is rooted in being good at card games. Like, I don't really attach my ego to many things in life, like at all. Like, I don't care if I'm good at them or I'm bad at them or what people think about my performance and sort of any given thing. But card games is a little bit of is a little bit different.
That's your exception.
So when I do, and when I am not good at a card game, it does sort of affect Like I do feel it. It is weird because like at this point I kind of think about myself as that. And I think there's merit to that. I don't think it's completely rooted in delusion. So it's hard for me to not be good. Like it actually kind of hurts. unlike other things where it's like, someone doesn't think you're smart or they don't think you're handsome. It's like, who gives a fuck, right? But if you're like, oh, I make mistakes and I don't have these good performances and this is what I put my time in. This is like, because for us, there's a lot of time that goes into it because we hop on this podcast every single week and we talk about it. Like a lot of our persona and ego is rooted in card games and rooted in Flesh and Blood. So I don't know. It's interesting. So a lot is changing for me. Like next week and over the next few months, because I have transitioned to a new role career wise, and yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I think in regards to competing, I do love to compete, and I agree with you in terms of the energy. It's just I was, for a period of time, I was kind of getting that from Lorcana because we're in the early days of Flesh and Blood, basically with that game, and it's like it's very addicting, very contagious. It has been limited somewhat because they did take down the online client, and it does make playing the game a lot harder. But I love what I love about card games, especially at the beginning of a card game, is information asymmetry. Because I had a friend ask me, he's like, why don't you like do something useful with your time? Like play poker or like he's like a chief of strategy at a sports betting company. He's like, or like, try to build models to beat those. And I was just like, because like with a lot of those things, there's information symmetry. Like the thing about poker is like there's years and years and years of theory. There's solvers. And yes, you get drunk people that show up to the casino and there's a huge information asymmetry in terms of like you're a professional player, they're not, and you have an advantage. But when you come into a card game, you get to like build the theory from the ground up. And not necessarily, we transfer theory from other card games or transferable skills, but I just love that. I love feeling that tangible edge in what is a highly variable and random game. It's just addicting for me. So I think I kind of been chasing that. For Flesh and Blood, the thing that I don't know hurt me the most when it was playing Flesh and Blood was actually the erosion of my support system in Flesh and Blood. Like a lot of the people that I played with, you not being one of them, have either moved on for the game or quit or done things like that. So we don't really have the same group that we used to. And I think because of that, particularly in person, it just made it harder to engage with the game. Because obviously you and I are on very, very different time zones. But if you looked at our past 3-4 years in the game, like a lot of those groups that we started with and we built from the ground up, like they're gone now. So for me to come back in a capacity, it doesn't mean that like I'm sure there's options available to me, but it's different, right? Like I have to come back for a very individual reason if I really want to get back into it. And yeah, I think that was the hardest part for me in the past like year and a half for Flesh and Blood was just the people. For me, part of the reason I was in the game was the competition, but it was also the people, and a lot of those people started to fall away, and it was like, yeah, it's an interesting spot.
Maybe the move might reinvigorate that, right? Finding groups and things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's gonna be interesting. So I feel like I definitely feel an onus to sort of progress with my life outside of card games too, because I mean you're hitting that age too where it's
doable, dude. I've been doing philosophy. It's definitely doable though. It's just about balance.
Yeah, it's about balance, and I'm historically fucking terrible. I'm very much I'm very all in on one thing or the other, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case. I am growing up as a human being, so maybe I can balance things better, but I tend to just get obsessed with kind of one thing. And it's something I'm working on for sure, but
he's got that addictive personality.
Yeah, well, I put all of my energy into like one thing, and I think that's it can be good and bad. But we'll see. A lot is up in the air. It's a big change for me. Like I'm moving somewhere I basically don't know anybody. Like I kind of have to start from zero again. But I did that on purpose. Like that was of my own volition. So definitely a longer answer you're looking for, but the TLDR is we'll see.
I think it's good to hear. Well, I'm excited to give me at Worlds. Looking forward to heading out to Osaka and play some Flesh and Blood. I'm sure we'll be able to. Yeah. I'm sure we play Kano.
Yeah, we'll get nude and go into the baths together. What are they?
Oh, the onsens.
Onsens. I think my tattoos.
You might be out, dude. You might have to go to a. Yeah.
People listen like, what the fuck? It should be fun.
Right.
Go ahead.
I just want to give a last shout out to testing group for nationals. Thanks to the team, to Dan Mackay, and obviously congrats to Dan on his nationals victory. This is a joke, right? So a few years ago, this goes back. Dan is actually the current New Zealand national champion in the Magic as well.
Yeah, it's true.
Because they stopped the national championship the year that he won nationals. And there's a funny story here. So I had just moved to Australia, and I was planning to come back for the nationals. It was like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 months after I moved to Australia. And we've been testing as a group together and testing on, Magic Online and things back in the day. And I had built this list, this like kind of red list effectively, this like a red aggro deck effectively. And I've been tuning the list, and I shared it with Dan and our other friend. And I was like, this is the deck. Like, this has been performing so well in testing. Like, you should just play this. And Dan's like, okay. And then I get to the airport to like fly the night before to get to nationals, and they're like, your flight's been cancelled. There's like really bad weather. Flight's cancelled. I'm like, okay. They're like, we can get your flight in the morning. I'm like, okay, cool. What time does it get? And they're like 11 a.m. It's like round one's at like 9 a.m. or something. I'm like, okay, don't even bother. So I miss this like Magic Nationals I've been testing heaps for. Dan ends up ultimately winning the national championship with like this deck I put together. So there's this running joke now that every time I'm like, oh, this list is good, you should play this list, Dan is like, okay, I'm going to play this list, and takes out a second national championship doing the same thing effectively.
2 for 2.
To be fair, Dan also had input on the deck. It's not like he didn't have input, but he was leaning Zen, and I was like, nah, dude, you've got to play this, honestly.
I do wish the best for Flesh and Blood, but it would be quite poetic if Flesh and Blood took a downturn, stopped the national champion in New Zealand, and he was the eternal national champion of Magic the Gathering in Flesh and Blood. He could also just win next year's Nats.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, it's been done before. We've got a few 2-time national champions. I want a quick shout out to a friend of the pod and someone who's tested with us as well for winning his nationals in the weekend. Juha Sainalampe won Finnish nationals in the weekend as well. So shout out to Juha for taking Nu all the way there. Actually, interestingly, Nu did make top 8 at our nationals as well, Brendan. Nick Butcher the night before decided he was going to play Nu instead of Zen, and declares after round 3, this deck is unplayable after going 1-2 in CC, but then 6-0ing draft and 2-1ing CC to make top 8. It's pretty funny.
That sounds very Nick Butcher-esque.
Yeah, definitely is.
Awesome. Well, if you listen to this podcast, you enjoy it, the number one thing you do is leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify's video version of this on YouTube at youtube.com/ArsenalPass. Deck list will be in the description. Big thank you to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. I'm sure Hayden will update you on the deck tech as soon as he comes back.
It'll be up this week.
Back to life.
It'll be up this week.
But thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.